Welcome, dear listeners, to a story that shows the most powerful truths are not shouted from rooftops, but whispered in the unlikeliest places. Tonight, we step inside the gilded walls of New York's Plaza Hotel, where wealth and power believe they set the rules. Beneath the glow of chandeliers, Monica stood alone, a stranger in a sea of privilege. One casual cruelty and name card torn in half ignited a silent battle. The air grew heavy, not with laughter, but with a tension so sharp it seemed the city itself held its breath. This is more than a party gone wrong. It is dignity against arrogance, integrity against prejudice, and one woman's quiet resolve to reclaim her place. Richard and Eleanor thought they could control the stage, but Monica was not there to simply belong. She was there to change everything. And with one quiet phone call, unseen but unstoppable, she was about to bring the entire grand performance crashing down. The story hasn't ended. What comes next will shake the room even harder. If you believe justice belongs to everyone, type one word in the comments, truth. And don't forget to like and follow for the next chapter. Snow drifted past the windows of the Plaza Hotel and softened the noise of Fifth Avenue, where yellow cabs idled and a bellman in a dark coat tipped his cap to guests arriving from the code. Inside, the grand ballroom shone with a steady glow of crystal chandeliers, their light settling on linen tables and a champagne tower that caught every glint. A string quartet played familiar winter melodies near the stage, the notes warm and unhurried. Servers moved in calm rhythms, silver trays level, glass stems chiming softly when a sleeve brushed past. In the midst of all that polish, Monica Harris paused near the tower, composed in a simple evening dress that made no argument for attention. She carried herself as if time moved a fraction slower for her, as if quiet were a choice she owned. No one in the room recognized the quiet strength she had brought with her, though some would feel it soon enough. She had come early and crossed the marble floor without hurry, passing a wall of framed photographs that showed the hotel in other winters, other centuries. At the door, the doorman had called her ma'am with the same simple respect he offered every guest. And in the hallway, an attendant had directed her to the ballroom with a gesture that signaled practiced care. It was the sort of evening New York knew how to present. A coat check line that advanced politely. A registration table that handled last names with patience. A sponsor board at the entrance holding its logos as if holding its breath. Near the bar, conversations moved in, measured arcs market talk, year-end donations, children home from college, ordinary threads that wrapped easily around an extraordinary gathering. Monica stood within reach of the sparkling cascade of flutes and watched the room the way a pilot watches weather. A waiter offered her a glass. She declined with a nod and a thanks, and his tray glided on. She made no move to announce herself, no move to claim a table. She did not need a place card to know where she belonged. Yet the habits of rooms like this have their own gravity, and they drew toward her a cluster of tuxedos that had been circulating the long way around the dance floor. At the curve of the tower, a laugh surfaced, small but sharp, and then a man with a bright boutonniere and the practiced smile of a host stepped into her line of sight. Richard Whitfield Jr. was a familiar presence to the ballroom staff. He greeted the band leader by first name and had already clasped a handful of shoulders with the confidence of someone born to the list. He looked at Monica, then at the tower, and lifted his chin as if to measure both. His voice carried easily over the quartet. "If you're fast," he said, "maybe you'll get a tip." The words landed lightly, as if he had offered a joke that required no answer. A couple at his elbow gave the sort of polite smile that means they are not sure whether to be amused. Monica's expression did not change. She turned her gaze from the glass to the man's face and held it there, steady as a candle flame that refuses a draft. Another figure came to rest beside Richard, the pearls at her throat catching the chandelier and returning a colder light. Eleanor Whitfield had the posture that makes a room rearrange itself. She studied Monica as if a fact on the page had been misprinted. "This event is for people who matter," she said, not loudly, simply and completely, as if she were reminding the staff of a rule they had somehow forgotten to enforce. A server paused with a tray of canapes, and then continued, the crystal clicking faintly, as he moved past the silence that followed. The ballroom carried on around them. A sponsor's representative gestured at a display near the far wall. The barback reset a line of highball glasses. The quartet slipped from one carol into another without breaking the thread. Monica let the music fill the space that the insult had tried to claim. She thanked another server who offered her water and stood as she had been standing, neither retreating nor advancing, a quiet figure beside a tower that shone like a stack of captured stars. From where she stood, she could see the doorway where late arrivals were checking names against a list and fastening white cards to silk lapels. Her own card had been tucked away a moment earlier, but it had never defined anything she needed. Richard let his smile widen in a way that asked the room to agree with him. It was a smile that had worked often enough to become habit. He snapped his fingers lightly, the sound a small, crisp seam in the music. "Over here," he said, as if guiding her to a task that required immediate hands. He tilted his glass and added, "If you're quick, you might still catch the first round." There was nothing hurried in Monica's reply. She simply met his eyes and held them as one might hold a line steady against an undertow. The couple at his elbow drifted a step away, not enough to be noticed, just enough to allow a different current to pass. From the hall, a draft brought in the winter air and the scent of wool and snow. A coat check ticket fluttered in a guest's hand like a leaf that had somehow survived the season. At a table near the stage, a foundation director asked her companion about a scholarship program. At another, two portfolio managers compared notes in quiet voices on end-of-year commitments, their talk careful and dry. Neither conversation rose above the quartet, and neither had any idea that the evening's most important transaction would require no bar tab and no gavel. The room held its rituals, polite laughter, small hand waves, small acknowledgments of familiar names, and within those rituals it made room for a more difficult truth. Eleanor stepped a half-pace closer, the pearls steady now, the decision made. "Darling," she said, "we don't want confusion during service." She extended a hand, palm up, and her tone suggested that whatever credentials might be produced should be produced quickly for the sake of everyone's comfort. Monica's hands remained by her sides. The surface of the ballroom floor gave back the chandelier in quiet pools, and somewhere near the bar a glass touched the tray with the soft sound of two thoughts agreeing. Behind Richard, two younger men in tuxedos had angled themselves to enjoy the scene without appearing to stare. Their laughter came out in polite threads, the kind people weave when they want to be seen as easy company. One of them raised his brows at the other in a question he did not need to ask. The other answered with the smallest motion of a shoulder, the gesture of a man who has learned that rooms like this enforce their customs without being asked. The music turned a page. Somewhere across the ballroom, the head server adjusted the pace of the staff with a glance, and the staff adjusted with the same quiet nod that had kept their evening smooth for years. Monica shifted her weight as a dancer does barely, gracefully, and watched without blinking. The orchestra lights were a warm gold. The conversations were gauzy at the edges. The city beyond the windows drew long lines of headlights like threads stitching an unseen hem. She took in the names on place cards as one takes in a weather report, notable but not decisive. Her calm fed on something more substantial than place cards. In the soft distraction that always rides along with luxury, her stillness gathered its own kind of attention. A waiter passing by slowed for a beat, as if to balance his tray on that stillness. Richard lifted his champagne flute as though offering a toast to a private joke. He pointed with the stem, a gesture as careless as it was deliberate, and the movement brought more eyes to his line. A woman at a nearby table looked up from her phone and watched over the rim of her glass. The quartet softened further, as ensembles do when they sense conversation is stepping forward. The music did not stop, but it thinned, leaving more air between notes. In that air, the ballroom's small noises found room to be heard. The whisper of satin against a chair, the faint scuff of a patent leather shoe, the tidy click of a compact closing. What began as an aside became a stage. Richard's gesture fixed Monica at its center, and the laughter that answered him widened a little, as laughter will when it has been given a cue. Eleanor's eyes moved over Monica with the coolness of appraisal, and then she gave a small nod that looked like permission but felt like a verdict. Near the doorway, a registrar lifted her head as if she had heard a name called wrongly. A server young, attentive, quietly proud of how straight he kept the tower of flutes, paused for the briefest beat, and then continued on, the tray unwavering. Monica's gaze shifted, not to the people arrayed before her, but to the room itself, as if she were making sure that the walls and lights and great central chandelier were exactly where she expected them to be. She was not measuring how much space she had left. She was measuring how much of the evening remained to be put to proper use. A murmur moved along the right side of the dance floor, then curved back and grew softer. A man at a corner table cleared his throat and peered toward the stage, as if the quartet might tell him what to think. Someone near the sponsor board practiced the careful smile that belongs to people who serve on committees. In such rooms, a kind word has a long reach, and the cruel one does too. The kind ones had not yet found their way across the marble. The cruel ones had. It was a lesson that the city never stopped teaching. In boardrooms, in hallways, in cars that rolled up to awnings dark with rain or bright with snow. Monica had learned it long ago and carried a response that did not need to be rehearsed in front of anyone. She smoothed a hand along the side seam of her dress as if checking a line, and then she drew a quiet breath, the sort that turns a page without creasing it. Richard's grin asked the room to lean in again. It did. He raised his arm a fraction higher and let the crystal catch another thread of chandelier light, a small beacon for a small show. He was not loud, but he was practiced, and practice can be its own kind of volume. His chin tipped. His eyes made a narrow assessment of a person he had not bothered to know. The couple who had drifted earlier drifted another step, pretending interest in the centerpieces, which were low and bright and not at all interesting. A photographer at the door took a test shot that lit a corner of the ceiling and left a soft white echo in the air. Eleanor allowed herself the suggestion of a smile, the kind that says the world is falling into the order you require of it. She had spent years proving that order to rooms that needed proof. She did not say another word. She did not need to. Monica understood the sentence even without its subject or its verb. The quartet held a phrase longer than usual, then resolved it with care, the bows moving as one in a gesture as old as the music they were playing. Somewhere outside the windows, a siren passed, thin, distant, already turning down another avenue. Monica had watched men like Richard practice being charming and women like Eleanor practice being final, and she knew that sometimes the most merciful thing one can do for such performances is to let them play through to their last neat line. She let this one do exactly that. The laughter that had begun as a polite ripple settled into a shallow pool. It did not reach as far as Richard hoped it would. On the far side of the room, a sponsor cleared his throat and looked at his watch. A woman at the same table laid a hand over his wrist, a gentle check that they were not going anywhere yet. The event was moving under its own lights, but the air within those lights had changed. The waiter returned, the one who kept his tray level as if it were part of the floor. He moved with the same care now, and did not look at Monica directly, only near her, the way people in old photographs look somewhere just to the side of lens. She thanked him again when he passed. The thanks was simple and unadorned. He carried it with him as he went. Across the room, someone made a small toast that no one heard, and a laugh followed it that no one joined. The barback wiped the ring from the mahogany and set the clean coaster in its place as if the ring had been a problem that could be solved easily. Richard, impatient with a wave that had lost its crest, remade the gesture. He pointed toward Monica again with his glass, the arc of his arm, a line anyone could follow. That was the moment when a few more faces turned unavoidably in her direction, caught by the simplest form of invitation. A pause rippled through those who had been telling themselves they were only glancing. The city beyond the windows kept sliding its lights along the glass. The ballroom waited the way a river waits at a bend. Monica did not offer the room a speech. She did not provide an argument for or against anyone's comfort. She did not place a claim card where a claim would be expected. The quartet softened again, and the violist tilted his head as if unsure whether to continue. Near the stage, a florist adjusted one stem in a low arrangement, and then stepped back 2 measured paces, satisfied. A bell from another floor sounded softly and was gone. The chandeliers looked higher than they had when the evening began. Richard raised his glass one last time, and in the small gleam that caught the rim, the room found an answer it thought it already knew. Laughter spread again, wider than before. A shallow tide that moved quickly and did not last. In its retreat, it left a clean line for Monica to cross. If she chose not to cross it. She chose something simpler and more final. Monica doesn't flinch. She simply lifts her phone to her ear, whispering, "It's happening." The music has softened after the last applause, and yet the room still carried the echo of what Monica had already set in motion when she had lifted her phone and said it was happening. That quiet, a deliberate thread she had placed through the evening, stayed with her now as the current of bodies shifted toward the champagne tower. The corner where she stood was bright and cold with reflected light. The flutes on the lower tiers gleamed as if a careful frost had settled on their rims. Servers trailed along the perimeter with sure hands and even steps, and a bellman lingering in the doorway eased it closed against the winter air to keep the warmth in. The night outside belonged to New York in December. The night inside belonged to rituals that thought themselves older than weather. Monica had no wish to disturb either. She meant only to move through each with quiet rightness. Eleanor reached her first. She arrived in a way that made the space present itself, gliding those last steps with pearls held still at the hollow of her throat. Her gaze passed over Monica as if searching for a missing label, then settled into a practiced calm. "We cannot afford confusion during service," she said, the gentleness of her tone carrying the shape of command. "Please show your credentials." There was no anger in it. There did not need to be. The ballroom was accustomed to this sort of sentence, and sentences like it had granted people permission to remake rooms since long before any of the evening's programs were printed. Monica offered no argument and no apology. She simply stood with her hands at her sides, allowing the request to remain a request. Richard drifted in behind, his boutonniere bright as a small advertisement, and his smile bright as a promise that always follows one. He tilted his glass, and the corner of his mouth bent into an aside meant for the room. "We have $1 billion on the table tonight," he said, not so loudly as to be called boastful, but loudly enough for half a dozen ears to accept the myth. No time for missteps. The quartet, halfway through a carol, softened to let passing conversation collect itself. Monica listened without changing the pace of her breath. She did not move to fill the silence with a name. She did not feel it at all. Eleanor extended a hand the way headmasters once extended hands and banks once extended pens. "Your pass, please." The request paused the air around the champagne tower, and a few nearby guests slowed to the gentle rubberneck of good manners. Monica had already placed the white card in the slim pocket of her dress, a formality honored and then forgotten, but she did not reach for it. For a heartbeat, the moment held, a small test of what the room believed it could require. Then Eleanor's fingers found Monica's wrist, light as if fastening a bracelet, and slid up to the event band that lay there like a practical ribbon. The gesture had the care of a hostess protecting order. It also had the inevitability of someone who had spent a lifetime mistaking order for justice. The sound that followed, the dry tear of paper against itself, cut the music cleanly. Conversations 2 tables away turned their heads at the precision of it. David Miller stepped forward with the reflex of a man whose job is not to interpret the evening but to keep it paved. He was in his middle years, tidy in his suit, the wire of a small earpiece drawing a discreet line along his collar. "Ma'am," he said, steady and respectful, "I will need to ask you to wait with me by the entrance." It was not a threat, not even a request with a raised edge. It was the professional courtesy that follows a decision already made by someone else. Monica looked at him and saw what the work had already cost him tonight, a shine of worry at the brow, a calculation behind the eyes that weighed a stranger's dignity against a set of instructions. She gave him a single nod that granted him respect he had not expected to receive. Richard found a new audience for his assurance. "Always tricky when someone tries to slip into the center of things," he said, the joke arranged so that anyone could laugh without catching a splinter. "If she is quick, perhaps she can help with the tray." The line was lighter than the consequence that hung from it. The line relied on an old story about who takes orders and who gives them, about who wears a name tag and who wears pearls. A couple in their later years glanced at one another, the woman's mouth softening into a frown that lasted only as long as the next bar of music. The man studied his glass as if the answer to something had been written on its surface and wiped away. Near the far wall, Olivia Carter loosened the clasp of a small evening bag and found her phone by touch. She was young enough to feel the hum of a story before anyone else heard it. She was old enough to understand the cost of getting it wrong in a room like this. She did not rush, did not raise the phone too high. She framed the pearls, the torn band in Eleanor's hand, Richard's easy posture, and Monica's stillness. She caught the face of David Miller, careful and unhappy. She let the microphone gather the ballroom the way a lake gathers light, quiet and without strain. The red light glowed. No one had given her permission. No one needed to, because the permission had already been discarded on the marble with the thin white strip that had once said, "This person belongs." Eleanor turned the torn band lightly between two fingers, as if she meant to set it aside for the staff to tidy. "This will be handled discreetly," she murmured, "for Monica's sake, and for any ears that might repeat the sentiment later. Please understand we cannot accommodate misrepresentations." The sentence made room for a kindness it did not offer. Monica did not attempt to step into it. She was not in the habit of walking into someone else's story about her. She thought, instead of the way the bellman at the door had tipped his hat to every guest without favor, and of the way the hallway attendant had pointed out the ballroom as if pointing out a horizon anyone could reach. Those were small courtesies, but they were the kind that preserved the dignity of a place. The correction she was about to make was not small at all, but it came from the same principle. A few more guests turned from their conversations to see how such a small matter could command such careful attention. The quartet, sensing the new center of the room, thinned their playing to a soft thread. Richard let his hand drift toward the pocket of his jacket and, with a theatrical patience, produced another white card he must have lifted from a table where someone would not miss it yet. "Here," he said, holding it out, and then, seeing that it was not going to be accepted, tearing it cleanly in two with a shrug that suggested no harm was meant. The pieces fell like polite confetti that no one wanted to sweep. "Sir," David told Monica gently, out of habit that misnamed her, then caught himself. "Ma'am, if you will come this way." The apology was in his eyes before the correction reached his mouth. He had received an instruction. He had also received the message from the room, one the room had not intended to send to him, that he might be the tool of someone else's unkindness. He did not want that. He also did not want to lose the job that kept his children in school and his mortgage in order. He waited for Monica's cooperation with the dignity of a person who knows that almost every choice offered to him has been narrowed by someone who will never have to make it. Olivia raised her voice only as much as was necessary to be heard over the hush. "For the record," she said, "each word even. I saw her name on the list this afternoon." She did not speak to Eleanor or to Richard or to David. She spoke to the space between them, the way reporters sometimes speak to the words that have already been said by a place. A man at a nearby table glanced down, half expecting to feel a vibration in his pocket that would substantiate or deny her claim. He felt none and frowned at his imagination for rushing ahead. Across from Olivia, a young server with a tray of sparkling water had slowed without meaning to. His name tag read Marcus. He had learned to make himself quiet in rooms like this for reasons that did not need repeating. Yet he heard his own voice enter the air, careful and steady. "She is telling the truth," he said, looking at no one directly, as if he could speak to the idea rather than to the people. The words surprised him by how little force they required. They were not a challenge. They were a correction, the same kind a person offers when a code is mislaid or a name mispronounced. The correction landed. It did not solve anything. It did not need to. It only needed to be there. Eleanor's mouth set. She had not expected to be contradicted by the room itself. "Enough," she said, and her tone spread a cool layer across the marble. "Security will escort you." The plural "you" was interesting. It suggested the room was being protected from something its own behavior had made. David felt the thinness of the ice under him. He moved one step closer to Monica, then stopped. "Ma'am," he said again. The word, now a small shield, offered to both of them. "May I see your credentials?" The torn band in Eleanor's fingers gave the answer that would have satisfied no one who asked in good faith. Monica breathed in once the way a swimmer breathes before a clean dive. The movement of air did not disturb a single stem of the champagne tower. She lifted her phone, not as a banner, not even as proof, simply as a tool. The screen cast a faint light on her fingers. The gesture was ordinary, the sort made in coffee shops and on subway platforms, in parking garages and at kitchen tables. It had never destroyed a myth in a ballroom until now. Olivia's lens tightened a fraction to capture the small square of light. Marcus shifted his tray to his left hand without looking down. At a table near the stage, a donor chose that moment to make conversation louder than the room wished, and then trailed off when the room did not join him. The quartet found a softer dynamic and played within it, seasoned professionals that they were. Richard could not let the quiet rule. "This is a performance," he said, with a pleasant brightness, the kind used to describe a stage magician's flourish. "We all appreciate a show, but there are limits." His eyes went to the other guests to collect their assent, a habit learned in other rooms that would have supplied it without question. He received a few glances, a few respectful nods from people who were not sure the moment wanted to be on his side. He laughed as if they had already agreed, and the laugh did not travel as far as he hoped. Eleanor returned to graciousness as a way to keep her footing. "We can handle this quietly. The staff knows what to do." She turned to David, granting him the authority he already had under her will. David did not take it. He waited, because something in Monica's bearing told him that a quiet had begun that did not intend to end with him at her elbow. He had been in rooms when men shouted to feel tall. He had never been in one where a woman's calm widened the floor until everyone had to decide how to walk. The barback replaced a spent bottle with an unopened one, turning the label toward the room as training required. A sponsor's aide whispered to her colleague that the seating chart might need to be adjusted if a certain family preferred a different exit. A man from the hotel watched the moment stretch and reminded himself of the standard line to offer if a guest raised a complaint later. The night was made of polished plans. The plan that now stood in the corner near the champagne tower belonged to no one else, and yet it was the simplest of all. Tell the truth about who is here, and then act as if the truth mattered. Monica allowed the room one more beat to do that on its own. When it did not, she lowered the phone just far enough for her voice to carry without strain, and she spoke with the same steadiness she had carried through the coat check and the long hallway and the sponsor board and the thin laughter. Priority 1, cancel the deal. The stage near the quartet had taken on a hush after the last torn credential and the quiet command that followed it. And that hush felt like a thread running through the length of the ballroom. Lights pulled on the polished floor, and the long tables carried centerpieces low enough to keep conversation gentle. Monica stood where the chandeliers drew a soft circle around her shoes, her posture untroubled. The air held a faint note of winter from the revolving door, the kind of clean cold that made the warmth inside feel earned. Her calm did not challenge the room. It asked the room to look at itself. She had said what she needed to say in a voice meant for one person, and yet the intention of it had reached farther than any toast. A woman at the nearest table set down her glass and adjusted the place card for a friend who had not arrived. A registrar at the doorway checked the list again, lips moving as she reviewed the names she already knew by heart. David Miller waited at a respectful distance, the line of his shoulders squared, as if balancing duty and doubt where anyone might see it. Eleanor stood near the tower of flutes with the steadiness of someone who believes that steadiness itself is proof. Richard lingered a half pace beyond the bouquet at his lapel crisp against the dark of his jacket, the practiced gleam in his eye brighter than the glass he held. Near the band, Olivia Carter lifted her phone a touch higher. She had a knack for angles that honored the truth without intruding on it. The lens found Eleanor's pearls, the torn paper resting near a tray, the steady uncertainty on David's face, and the clear half-smile that sometimes crossed Monica's features when she had decided that silence would be the strongest line she could speak. Olivia knew that rooms like this thrived on perfect surfaces. Her work was to show what lived just beneath them. She felt a small hum in her palm as the stream stabilized, a digital pulse that did not announce itself the way laughter did, but traveled farther. Richard disliked silence because it did not affirm him. He glanced toward the registration stand and, with a motion he made casual, reached for a spare lanyard someone had left coiled beside a stack of clean programs. He dangled the badge for the room to see, held it as if offering one more chance for compliance, then snapped the plastic clip in his fist with a click that carried. It was not the paper sound from moments ago. It was a demonstration that a small part of a system could be broken without effort, and that breaking it could be mistaken for authority. He smiled and let the useless ribbon fall to the table edge, where it hung like a wrong note. No one asked him why. It is rare for people to test the reason behind the gestures they have been trained to accept in expensive rooms. But a college donor paused mid-sentence and looked to the stage, as if the quartet might lower their bows and explain what this new rhythm meant. The musicians did what professionals do. They softened their volume and stretched the space between phrases until it could hold what the room did not want to name. Monica did not track the broken clip. She watched faces instead. A caterer who had learned to stand lightly on the balls of his feet so glasses would not chatter. A couple in their later years whose hands found each other just below the tablecloth when something in the air did not feel right. A hotel manager who kept his attention on the doorway and the flow of arrivals, pretending nothing unexpected could occur in a place that had been rehearsed for decades. She took in Olivia's focus and the way David steadied himself by not moving at all. She took in Marcus, the young server with the careful stride, now pausing in that space between action and decision that can last a breath and feel like an hour. Eleanor kept to gentility. "We will clear this up with the least possible disturbance," she said, offering the room a version of mercy that placed the burden elsewhere. She looked not at Monica but through her, as if cataloging all that could have been done differently to avoid this interruption. Richard's smile invited agreement. "We all came for a celebration," he offered. "There is no cause for theatrics." He placed a hand on the back of a nearby chair and gave it the slightest push to straighten it. A small, tidy fix for an untidy moment. It made him feel helpful. Olivia let the silence sit in the stream until anyone watching could feel the pause deepen. When she spoke, she kept her voice low and even, the way radio hosts do when they want you to lean toward a fact rather than be struck by it. "This is a record of the room," she said to her viewers, but also to the air around her, and of what is said in it. No one told her to stop. A sponsor at the far side thumbed the side of his phone with the idle habit of a man who rarely needs to ask permission to do anything. Marcus stepped forward without drawing attention to the step. He had been trained to be invisible and knew that sometimes invisibility can end a story before it becomes one. He found a place near Monica's shoulder where his tray would not be in the way, and he was quiet until quiet would have been agreement. "She was on the list," he said gently, not into the middle of the circle, but into the air that held it up. He did not point. He did not plead. He stated a small truth, as if returning a wallet found under a chair. If the room had been better trained, it would have thanked him. David heard the words and felt them in the same place where he kept the names of couples who should not be seated near one another and exits that should be checked twice. He did not shift his feet. He altered nothing in his stance that could be seen from a distance, but he withdrew the idea of an escort from the part of his mind that had been ready to perform it. There was no announcement in the change, no challenge. He did what men like him do when the job asked them to choose between an order and something that looks exactly like dignity. He waited for the truth to finish arriving. Richard could not accept a slowdown. He chose cheerfulness again, a habit that had served him well. "This is all very dramatic," he said to no one and everyone. "Perhaps we should not encourage it." He angled his chin toward David as if to remind the guard who in this room counted as we. The gesture felt old, one he had learned from other men who had learned it from others. It did not land the way it taught him it would. The faces around him were not the faces he wanted. He was performing for a mirror that would not keep a straight line. Monica let him talk. She did not give his words a place to settle. She stood without apology and without necessity, which is a way of saying she stood in a kind of freedom that expensive rooms are not built to recognize when it is not carried by the most expected bodies. The chandeliers lent her the same light they gave everyone else. The quartet held the last note of a hymn, as if guarding it for someone who would need it soon. The hotel manager reached for his radio and thought better of using it. The registrar at the doorway checked the time and did not write it down. Two financiers crossed from the bar, faces drawn to the same gravity that draws birds to a wire when weather changes. They did not announce their attention. The space around Monica widened just enough to be noticed on camera, and Olivia noticed. It meant that even those who had not decided what they believed had decided to keep their view of her unobstructed. Eleanor saw the shift and kept her tone smooth. "If you will come with me, we will handle this privately," she said, offering two things at once, the cover of discretion and the loss of witness. Monica gave the smallest shake of her head. Not a refusal, only a correction, of course. The room would handle it here. Marcus held his tray at an angle that made it easier for a guest to take a glass without catching the foot of the stem on the rim. The habit was automatic. He did it even now, when no one reached for a glass. He wondered briefly about the end of the night, about the walk home and the quiet of his apartment, and the way a city can feel like a friend when it lets you breathe in cold air and know you have done one true thing between dinner and sleep. That thought steadied him. At the edge of the floor, a photographer took one deliberate frame with a wide lens and then lowered his camera content to let the city look at itself without his help. The quartet slid into a cadence and sat on it, a musical patience. Monica looked at David and nodded once, granting him the courtesy to which he had already tried to rise. He returned it with a look that said he would not be part of a humiliation. It was not a dramatic promise. It was work, and he knew how to do it. A soft chime sounded as a guest stepped outside to take a call, and the door breathed winter into the room. The air sharpened for a moment, then warmed around the guests again. Richard sought the attention he could feel slipping and found it by raising his voice the way one raises the volume on the radio when the car enters a tunnel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, brimming with reassurance, "let us not confuse a misunderstanding with an invitation to disorder." He lifted his glass as if to begin a speech, but no speech followed. Words were not cooperating with him tonight. Olivia composed the frame once more, and the phone in her hand drew a clean line around the circle. She knew the craft well enough to keep her own presence out of the story. She was there to witness, not to cast. Her breath was steady. Her eyes had the quiet focus of someone who believes that the best way to respect a place is to show it plainly. The comments flowing under the stream did what comments do, but she kept her mind on the room, not the scroll. Monica's phone rested lightly against her palm. The last call had been brief and sufficient. She allowed one more count of the music, allowed the room one more chance to balance itself without being told how. Then she spoke again, each word laid down as if building a short bridge across a small river. Phase 2 is emotion. She did not explain what the phrase meant. She did not need to. Those who knew enough to be concerned showed it in the way their shoulders tightened. Those who did not know enough felt the ripple anyway, and looked for a reason. The room held still as if waiting for the weather to declare itself. It felt as if the night had shifted incrementally under their feet, just enough to be noticed, not enough to make anyone stumble. Eleanor kept her smile, a smooth line that said she would take the next step with the same poise she had taken every prior step. Richard took comfort in the bright weight of his glass and the old style of his cufflinks. Marcus adjusted his grip on the tray and set his feet as he had been taught to set them before a crowded table. David widened his view so he could see both the entrance and the cluster around Monica without moving his head. Olivia checked the battery icon, the most ordinary ritual in a night that was no longer ordinary. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Did she just say Harlow Capital? Guests glanced at their screens, sensing something big is breaking. The chandeliers held their steady light, while the quartet thinned its volume to a careful thread, and in that thinner sound, the room gathered itself. Phones glowed dimly in hands held at waist level, as if no one wanted to seem eager to watch, and yet everyone wished to see. Monica stood at the edge of the dance floor where the parquet met marble, a quiet seam in a grand place. Her calm had not wavered in the long minutes since the first insult, and it did not waver now. She looked to David Miller and gave him a nod that respected the work he was trying to do with dignity intact. He answered with a measured breath and the smallest lift of his chin, choosing patience over performance. Eleanor Whitfield kept to elegance as a form of control. "We will resolve this without disruption," she said, and the evenness of her tone asked the room to accept her sentence as if it were the natural order of the evening. Richard stood a step behind her, that practiced brightness still in his eyes, the kind of brightness that seeks agreement before it earns it. He straightened the chair with 2 fingers, the gesture of a man who wears neatness as proof. Around them, the rituals continued. A waiter smoothed a cloth napkin, a bartender turned a label to face outward. The quartet found a softer dynamic again and stayed there. The familiar motions were meant to soothe. They only made the strain more visible. Olivia Carter inched closer with the steady confidence of someone who believes that clarity is a courtesy. She held the camera at a respectful tilt, catching the edge of the champagne tower, Eleanor's pearls, Richard's clipped smile, David's line focus, and Monica's stillness. She knew how easily a surface like this could absorb a slight and leave no mark. Her lens would give the moment a memory the room could not tidy away. Not far from her, Marcus adjusted the angle of his tray to keep it balanced as he shifted his weight, then anchored himself at a respectful distance from Monica, a quiet witness who had already chosen truth over habit. There was a threshold quality to the silence. It was the quiet of a house just before a door opens to whatever has been expected and dreaded in equal measure. Monica allowed that silence to stand, then stepped fully into the open space between herself and the Whitfields. Her heels were steady, and the sound they made against the floor was unhurried, as if she were counting, as if each click were a measured reply to every assumption that had been laid at her feet. She did not raise her voice. She did not lower it either. She carried it the way a person carries their own name. You have spent the last quarter hour treating me as though I wandered into a room I did not pay for, she said, the line delivered without bitterness and without apology. Richard began to smile again, the automatic reflex of a man who has always met pressure with charm. Let us not dramatize, he offered, his tone bright with dismissal. We have important business to celebrate. Eleanor's hand moved slightly, a cue for the guard to proceed. David did not move. He had already chosen a different kind of service. Monica held the room with steadiness that did not press and did not plead. You never asked my name, she said, and the sentence found its mark. Several guests looked down as if the words had been printed on their programs. She let that awareness settle, then set the facts where they belonged. I am Monica Harris, Chief Executive of Harris Global. I built the transaction you are celebrating. I funded it, and a moment ago, I reassigned it to Pierce & Company. The change in the ballroom was visible before it was audible. Postures altered by degrees. A shoulder lowered, a glass paused short of a sip. A smile folded itself away. Olivia held the frame and added exactly nothing to it. The truth did not need help. Marcus, tray steady, swallowed once, and felt his breath ease. David's eyes moved not to the entrance now, but to the Whitfields, as if to confirm for himself who in fact required escort from the center of the room. Near the bar, a sponsor's aide shifted her tablet against her side as if it had grown heavier. Richard laughed, but it was the kind of laugh a microphone would hear as a scene. No one moves capital in the middle of a gala, he said, easy and certain. A man making the world behave with a sentence. Eleanor added the veneer of civility. If there has been a misunderstanding, it can be corrected privately. Her tone offered mercy on terms that would have kept the evening whole for everyone but the woman in front of her. Monica did not take the offer. She did not need the evening to be whole. She needed it to be honest. Then check your phones, she said. Not as a dare, but as an instruction a teacher might give a room full of students who had missed the first answer because they preferred the sound of their own voices. She lifted her palm slightly, not to display a screen, but to show that the work had already been done. The words had gone out. The calls had been made. The permissions that matter in rooms like this had been signed and delivered far from the chandeliers. She had not raised her voice to reach the back row. She had built a channel that placed the back row in everyone's hand. Around the room, the pause grew heavier in the way a sky grows heavy before rain. Guests looked to one another, the unspoken etiquette of shared disbelief moving along the tables. A portfolio manager who had been telling a safe story about year-end strategy stopped mid-sentence. A foundation director pressed her lips together and waited, almost kindly, for someone to model the correct response. The quartet held a suspended cord and did not resolve it. The head server at the far station flashed the question with his eyes and received a tiny shake of the head in answer. Do nothing. Let the moment be Wooded Island. Richard began again, slower now. Even if you had that kind of authority, he said, it would not be exercised here. But the assertion no longer felt like a net. It felt like a line thrown into water that had no wish to return it. Monica's reply did not rise. This is exactly where authority is exercised, she said, in rooms where people think courtesy should make inequity invisible. She did not look at Eleanor when she spoke, and yet the words reached her first. The pearls at Eleanor's throat seemed to settle a fraction lower, as if reassessing their own weight. Olivia found David's face in the frame. and what she captured there would matter later. A man who had been asked to perform removal deciding, with professional grace, not to be used. She widened the shot and took in the larger geometry of power as it shifted. The slow drift of bodies away from the Whitfield's orbit, the gentle angle of shoulders toward Monica, the stillness at the center that so rarely belongs to a woman like her in a room like this. No one declared loyalty. The posture of the crowd declared it for them. Eleanor tried dignity the way one tries a familiar door. My family has been an anchor for this event for years, she said, a sentence half tradition and half warning. Monica inclined her head, a courtesy offered without surrender. Anchors are most useful when they hold, she said softly, not when they drag. The line was not meant to wound. It was a fact, politely stated. It had the effect facts often have when a room has been practicing its own stories for too long. Near the doorway, the registrar glanced down at her list again and saw what she had missed the first time. The name at the top that had not required a place card because people like that do not need place cards to belong. She let out the smallest breath, the kind that forgives a mistake without asking for a performance of apology. Marcus, encouraged by a courage that had not asked his permission before it arrived, stepped half a pace nearer to Monica as if to place his ordinary presence between her and any new small harm. No one told him to move back. Richard's charm had become labor. He set his glass down with careful precision, a man choosing neatness while the room chose something else entirely. He looked toward the band and then away, as if wondering whether music could be made to reset a night. It could not. Music can soothe. It cannot undo what a clear sentence has done. Monica breathed, the simple rhythm of a person whose decision is complete. You call me a fraud, she said, the words measured. You tore my credential, and you tried to remove me from a transaction I constructed. She lifted her hand, palm open, as if placing those facts gently on the table. The record will show exactly that. It will also show the correction. She did not say more. She did not need to. The correction was already on its way into everyone's pocket. Push notifications buzz in pockets across the ballroom. Screens glow. Whitfield Group loses $900 million deal to Pierce, and company gasps rise like a storm breaking. The first sound after the screens lit was not speech, but the delicate skid of chairs as people stood without meaning to. A soft chaos like leaves shifted by a steady wind. On faces, surprise took a second to turn to understanding, then into calculation. The marble floor reflected the new arrangement of the room as bodies angled away from the Whitfield tables and toward a calmer center that seemed to be wherever Monica Harris stood. She did not move quickly. She did not need to. Calm has a way of finding its own gravity. Eleanor felt the room change and chose composure, the porcelain kind that can be set down carefully and admired for its steadiness. We can fix this, she told the air, though her voice was meant for Monica. She reached for a tone that had rescued fundraisers and board meetings, the tone that invited reason like a trusted guest. Monica turned toward her with the respect due an elder and kept her voice low enough to preserve dignity all around them. You had your chance when you mistook me for someone you could dismiss, she said. You chose not to speak with me then. The sentence did not bruise. It simply recorded. Rebecca Johnson arrived from the periphery, with the quiet of an orchestra librarian laying the correct score on the stand. She held a slim tablet flat against her palm. Her eyes sought Monica's, offered a nod, and waited. When Monica inclined her head, Rebecca spoke in a clear undertone. Vendor lockouts complete. Access to our investor portal revoked. Draft press statement ready for your approval. One line to review. She angled the screen. Monica read, adjusted a single verb, and returned it. Send. Around the ballroom, staff felt the temperature of the event change the way an experienced driver feels a road surface under tires. The head server adjusted the pace of the team with a look. Bartenders reset behind the rail as if making room for a different kind of thirst. The quartet finished the phrase they were on and let their hands rest, the bows held at an angle that suggested respect rather than surrender. The conductor of such nights is rarely announced, but everyone knows when the conductor has changed. Guests who had spoken easily with the Whitfields an hour earlier began to discover a sudden interest in other parts of the room. A real estate developer folded his napkin with care that read as courtesy, and murmured that he promised himself he would not be late home. His companion nodded, grateful for a reason that did not require speech. Two asset managers from different firms found themselves shoulder to shoulder and exchanged a glance that stood in for a week's worth of emails. Move exposure off their books before the opening on Monday morning. No one ran for the exits. This was not a fire. It was a public reckoning in soft shoes. Olivia Carter stayed close to the story without touching it. Her lens caught the shape of the migration. Emptying seats at the Whitfield table, a widening ring of space around Eleanor's chair, the growing crowd not exactly around Monica, but aligned with her. She held the camera steady and kept her voice low, a witness more than a narrator. The comments on her stream scrolled like rain on a windshield, heard more than seen. She did not feed that noise. She served the room. Richard tried to lace the moment with charm, a habit that had paid him well for years. He set his glass down with a precision that could be mistaken for control and looked for a friendly face to give him the old feedback loop. It did not come. He tried humor instead, the safe, polished kind. Everyone, breathe. These alerts are always dramatic. The sentence tried to lift the weight that had already settled. It did not move. Monica felt the pressure directed at her and let it pass through like wind around a steady corner of a building. She accepted a business card offered by a cautious donor and returned a polite, brief promise to follow up next week. She thanked a server for water and meant it. She let the room see how a person stands when they have nothing to hide and no interest in gloating. She did not look toward the live camera. She did not look away from it either. She looked at people one by one, as if confirming they were real. Eleanor tried a different path. I regret the tone, she said. Each word chosen as one chooses pearls from a velvet tray, and I regret the misunderstanding. There has been pressure on our family, you must know that. Important projects depend on us. No one here wants to see harm done. There was a request inside the regret, a request for the room to agree that harm had happened only because someone insisted on a truth too plain to be comfortable. Monica did not argue the frame. She replaced it. Harm began when you defined my presence as a disruption, she said, gently. What follows is accountability. Near the entry, a hotel manager prepared a neutral sentence in case a guest demanded an explanation later. He rehearsed it under his breath and then relaxed when he realized no one wanted the hotel to apologize for a guest who had told the truth. The registrar at the door, moved by a small sincerity she could not ignore, repositioned the stack of programs so that Monica's name was visible on the front page, an ordinary kindness that threatened to make her cry. She did not cry. She straightened the stack again. The neatness, a way of blessing the moment. Marcus Lee, holding his tray close to his body, slid a half step nearer to Monica's circle. He did not want to intrude. He wanted to stand where he could be useful. He had not planned to speak again, but a guest, finding herself beside him, asked in a whisper whether she had heard correctly. Marcus' answer was soft. You heard correctly. The guest nodded and had nothing to add. She set her glass on his tray, and he took it with a gratitude he did not show. He felt a calm he had not expected, the calm of having said the right thing the first time. Rebecca's tablet chimed with a confirmation from the communications team. She reported it in a voice meant for Monica and for the record. Statement released. Headline leads with values, not conflict. Monica approved the choice. Values are the point. Rebecca also noted incoming emails from suppliers pleased to remain in good standing and from two who wanted to correct prior alignments before night's end. Monica said, honor the request without ceremony. It was a cleaner justice than any speech about second chances. At the bar, a public relations woman in Navy checked her own phone and felt her evening snap into work mode. She told her assistant to cancel a morning briefing, not to reschedule, and to prepare contingency language for a set of interviews that would now go unwatched. She smoothed her skirt and inhaled in the practiced way of people who make crises smaller by taming them into sentences. This one would not tame. It would pass, as all storms do, but it would leave a contour on the map. The quartet, seeing the inevitable shape of the night, packed with discretion, their cases closing quietly in a soft layer of music that still seemed suspended above the floor. The first violinist inclined her head toward Monica as she slipped by. An unspoken recognition from one professional to another. We saw what you did. We will remember it when we play elsewhere. The band did not linger for applause. Professionals rarely do when the applause is for someone else's work. A pair of executives from Pierce & Company entered the edge of the frame, then, neither triumphant nor shy. They carried the posture of people who know their fortune tonight is borrowed from a courage they did not have to display. One approached Rebecca and offered the smallest smile. "We will adhere to the standard you set," he said. Rebecca answered in the currency of timelines and deliverables. "You will receive protocols tonight," she said. "Signatures by the end of the week. Compliance checks begin on day one." The executive nodded, grateful for the clarity and for the absence of lording. A slow, scattered applause began from the side of the room, not out of celebration but out of recognition. It was the clapping people do when they have witnessed someone pull the truth through a narrow space without tearing it. The sound gathered, not insistent, not aggressive, but sure. Monica raised a hand, not to invite more, but to ease it. She reached for a flute when a server offered one, then paused and let her hand fall, gentle and final. It was never a win. It was a correction. The words moved through the room like a level laid on a foundation. They made everything line up. Richard flushed, not with the heat that would pass, but with the kind that finds a home behind the eyes. His mouth opened, as if searching for a phrase old enough to rescue him, and then closed again when the room did not hold out a rope. He turned to Eleanor for a cue. Eleanor's hands were quiet in her lap, one closed over the other, the pearls resting as if they had weight for the first time. She had been taught to endure long winters and short tempers. She had not been taught what to do when the judgment of a room turned out to prefer humility to decorum. People began to leave the Whitfield cluster the way a tide recedes without hurry. They did not rush. They simply let their intentions become visible, placing distance between themselves and the table that had defined the event until the truth took the definition back. At a side table, an older investor leaned to his friend and said that it would be prudent to speak with their brokers at first light on Monday morning. The friend said that first light would be too late. They both nodded, the slight nod of men who plan 2 steps ahead in public and 10 at home. Olivia steadied her camera on the faces that mattered. The faces across the room that received the correction like a weatherfront eyes, narrowing not in suspicion, but in adjustment. The faces near Monica that opened just enough to show relief. The face of David Miller, which revealed the modest grace of a man who had chosen not to make a mistake he would remember for years. She noted the steadiness of Rebecca, one hand on the tablet, one ready to step forward or back as needed. She gave no attention to the drama of those who realized too late that they had chosen the wrong audience to impress. Her audience would be asleep soon, phones on nightstands, commentary cooling. What would remain was the recording and the memory of a tone of voice that made a room stand straighter. A woman from a foundation approached Monica and said that public standards have a way of becoming private habits when brave people insist on them. Monica thanked her without claiming the adjective. A man from a hospital board asked if there would be guidance he could share with his trustees, guidance that would look like policy more than a press moment. Monica said Rebecca would send a concise version of what values look like when they are paid attention to. She did not promise a manifesto. She promised instructions. It is a different kind of mercy. A server arrived with a tray of fresh flute and stood with the same patience he had held all night. Monica looked at the tray and then at him, saw the effort behind the steadiness and the quiet dignity of good work done under fire. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. She took nothing from the tray. The gesture mattered more than the glass. Across the room, a group of young associates watched her and learned something they would carry into 100 smaller rooms, that a correction can be made without spectacle and still change the architecture. What held the night together now was not program nor protocol, but the simple ethics of how people choose to behave when the story they were using unravels in their hands. Eleanor remained seated, composed, unhelped. A single sympathetic acquaintance approached and offered a soft touch to her shoulder, then moved on, unwilling to stand between the moment and its record. Richard tried to reclaim performance by starting a new conversation with 2 men who used to laugh quickly at his lines. They nodded politely and excused themselves to make a call. At the edges, hotel staff guided the evening toward a gentle landing. Doors opened and closed with their usual hush. The coat check slipped tickets to guests who now had more to think about. As they stood at the curb, doormen looked north and south for open space in the stream of taxis. Outside, winter made its quiet arguments on the air, and breath rose white from mouths that said little. Inside, the crowd thinned, leaving behind arrangements in low balls and damp rings on linen where neglected water glasses had rested. Rebecca returned to Monica with 2 short updates. Media carrying the statement without spin, she said. Suppliers confirming alignment. 2 invites from civic groups to discuss standards. Monica nodded. Accept the civic groups, the rest can wait. She looked around the room once more to be certain that no one had been overlooked, neither ally nor dissent. She would not leave a person who needed a word. When she found no such person, she drew a slow breath that felt like the end of a piece of music that had almost gone wrong, but did not. A final wave of departures carried the room toward stillness. The last notes of quiet conversation slid into the carpet and were gone. Olivia lowered her phone and saved the file, then held the device with both hands for a moment, the way one holds a small responsibility with care. She looked toward Monica and followed the line of her sight to the doors. The story was not done, but this chapter was. Eleanor's clutch rings, Richard's phone buzzes, non-stop calls from their board chair. They don't answer. The implosion is live. Sung found the tall windows of the Midtown conference room and laid an amber stripe across the table, a late warmth that made the glass look thicker. The city beyond moved at a winter pace, taxis drifting and buses shouldering their way south. And in the room, the air had the stillness of a place measured for decisions. It felt like the next page after a long chapter, the quiet that follows a choice spoken plainly. Monica Harris stood with her hands in her pockets and watched the avenues breathe, the way a person looks up when a hymn resolves. The night before had set a course. The day after would hold it steady. She had not announced a victory. She had called for a correction. That word lingered in the building, moving from elevator lobbies to the workrooms where communications drafts were shaped, from legal pads to the soft glow of laptops. In the morning, she and Rebecca Johnson sat together without hurry, reviewing the stream of confirmations, questions, and small attempts at disguise that arrive whenever power reassigns itself. Rebecca summarized with the clarity of a conductor setting tempo. Vendors who had doubted they would be seen were writing to confirm they had always believed. 2 firms that had chosen convenience over conscience wanted to come back in from the cold. Journalists asked for angles that would make the story belong to them without tilting it away from the truth. Monica approved what needed approval and returned the rest with a sentence that had no flair on it. We will not dilute the standard. The room had been set for a working afternoon. Coffee stood in white cups with small saucers to catch the rings. A plate of fruit sat untouched because everyone preferred the smell of coffee to the sweetness of citrus just now. The television mounted on the wall ran a scroll without sound, a ribbon of markets and headlines that marked time without demanding attention. Outside, the light faded to a city gold and then into the softer gray that cues the office lights to take over. The windows made a quiet mirror. The people inside saw their outlines and were untroubled by what they saw. Jonathan Pierce arrived with the respectful economy of a man who knows it is not his room. He brought 2 of his executives, both carrying notepads rather than laptops, both alert in the way of men who have a chance to learn how to behave when the weather changes. He shook hands with Rebecca first and then with Monica, the order a small testament to how he understood the work had been done. You asked that we come ready to implement, he said. We are ready. Monica gestured to chairs without ceremony. Good, she said. We're not going to write a manifesto. We are going to write procedures and then keep them. The first part of the hour belonged to definitions. Rebecca walked the table through a set of clear lines. What counts as public misconduct, what the first response will be, what the threshold is for ending a relationship, and how the decisions will be recorded. Her voice was steady, the tone of someone who has learned that kindness begins with removing ambiguity. Jonathan asked to make 2 of the lines more visible, not to soften them, but to prevent anyone later from pretending that they could not see. Monica approved the suggestion. She wrote with a pen rather than a keyboard, and the scratch of it on paper sounded like a small oath. They paused once so that someone could refill cups, a quiet intermission that let the room breathe. Monica stepped to the window and let the city recalibrate her. She did not draw strength from the height. She drew it from the fact that the street carried on, that people below crossed at the light with bags in their hands and children under their arms, unbothered by what the top floors of a building had decided. It kept her honest. She returned to the table with a steadiness that had unsettled a ballroom and now steadied a team. Rebecca opened the folder and slid a single envelope across the table. It was heavy paper, the kind people use when they want the object itself to perform importance. The Whitfield seal sat on the flap, embossed so the fingertips could not ignore it. Courier brought it at midday, Rebecca said, marked urgent and private. She did not say what the letter asked for. She did not need to. The room knew the script. Jonathan looked down and then away, giving Monica room to choose the dignity of the moment. Monica did not touch the seal. She looked at the envelope as one looks at a key that no longer fits any lock in the house. There is a kind of mercy that is offered for appearance, and there is a different kind of mercy that is offered for truth. Monica had no interest in the first. She considered whether the letter ought to be archived for the record, another artifact for a file that would one day explain itself to an auditor who took pride in neat outcomes. Then she thought about the registrar who had repositioned a stack of programs the night before so that a name could be seen. She thought about David Miller, who chose not to be used. She thought about Marcus, who said a correct sentence and then held his station. The file did not require another page. The people who had made the truth clear required her to be clear in turn. She rose without hurry and crossed to the small console by the window where a compact shredder sat, a practical square with a narrow mouth. No one had placed it there for drama. Offices need such tools because paper still insists on performing itself for a while before it is done. Monica fed the envelope in without opening it. The paper took a breath and became fringe, then a soft drift of confetti that would not be thrown. She did not watch it go down. She watched the skyline. I did not need to prove I belonged, she said. I built the room. She did not raise her voice for the line to carry. It did. Jonathan nodded, not as a man who had been given a show, but as a man grateful to have been told how to behave when he left the room. He set his pen on the pad and said what he had come to say. We would like to carry this as a standard, not as a campaign, quietly if possible, firmly either way. Monica returned to her chair. Then we will write it so it can be kept, she said. Short enough to be read, strong enough to be remembered. No drama in the language, only clarity. Rebecca began sketching headings in the margin of her notes, the structure already visible. Conduct, response, severance, communication, review. She wrote the words the way a mason lays stones, each with a flat face and a sound position. They worked a while longer, enough to turn intentions into sentences. In the pause that followed, Rebecca offered 2 short updates. Media carrying the statement without spin, she said. Civic groups requesting a conversation about public standards. Monica granted both, accept the invitations, keep the interviews few, gave examples instead of slogans. She was not interested in being a symbol. Symbols can be rearranged. She wanted a set of habits. The room drifted to logistics. Signatures would be gathered over the coming days. Compliance checks would begin at the start of the next week. Training modules would be updated before the next quarter turned. Jonathan's team agreed to mirror the schedule without trying to modify it to fit their internal calendar. Monica liked the words that anchored the plan. Gather, begin, update. They were ordinary. Ordinary words are the best vessels for necessary change. When the meeting wound down, Rebecca stayed to stack drafts and tuck away the notes that should not wander. Jonathan and his 2 executives stood and shook hands in the same order that they had entered. Thank you for not making a ceremony of it, he said. Ceremonies are riverbanks, Monica answered. Useful, but not the water. He smiled at that and let the image carry him out the door. Monica and Rebecca walked the hallway together. Staff looked up and then looked back down, not out of avoidance, but because the day had taught them that the best way to respect a person's work is to do your own. At reception, the guard on duty glanced toward the glass and then toward Monica, and he nodded once as if to say that the building had a different weight tonight and that it suited it. The 2 women returned to the conference room to check that nothing had been left behind that should not be. Evening had come fully, the sun-stripe gone from the table, the city lights coupling with the office fixtures to draw the room in closer, the television scrolled in its corner, soundless, Rebecca stood with her tablet at her side and spoke in a tone that belonged more to a friend than to a colleague. "You were precise when you needed to be," she said. "People remember that." Monica smiled without showing teeth, the private smile of someone who prefers usefulness to applause. "Precision is a kind of kindness," she said. "It does not waste anyone's time." They stood quietly for a moment and let the room rest. A courier walked by, shoes quiet on the carpet. Somewhere a printer warmed itself and slept again. The building sighed the way old buildings do when they are at peace with their age. Monica turned to the glass once more. The city, as it always is and never is, changing under its own lights. She watched the avenues and did not mistake their motion for progress. Progress needed choices, words, and follow-through. She had made the first and written the second. The third would be done in ordinary days by ordinary people who took their work seriously. In the reflection, she saw Rebecca watching the same view. They did not speak. They did not need to. The promise they had made to the room the night before and to this room now did not require speech. It required a posture, a schedule, and a refusal to forget. Monica picked up her coat and slipped one arm into the sleeve. She would walk home if the air stayed tolerable. She liked the city best at the point when office air becomes street air, when the day and the night trade places without drawing attention to themselves. Rebecca checked the locks on the credenza, a habit that had the feel of ritual. She reached for the wall switch, then paused when motion on the television caught her eye. The anchor's face moved with the practiced gravity of national news, but the sound was still off, conceding the room to its own quiet. The scroll beneath the image advanced 2 lines, then settled into the phrase that the week would remember. News tickers on muted television flash. Harris Global sets new industry standard. Monica turns to the skyline, smiling quietly. The city's skyline faded into quiet light, and with it came the sense that a storm had passed and left the air clearer than before. What began as a night of dismissal and doubt had ended with dignity restored, and the echo of one calm voice changing the weight of an entire room. In its heart, the story reminds us that truth has a way of finding its place, and that justice, once revealed, reshapes not only contracts and headlines, but the spirits of those who witness it. To those who have felt overlooked or unheard, it speaks gently. Redemption is possible, and love expressed through fairness can build a stronger home than power ever could. Like a lantern set quietly in a window, a single act of respect can guide us through the darkest corners of human pride. As you reflect, consider the silent gifts of kindness around you, and if this story has touched you, pass its warmth to someone who waits for light.